It began on a silent border between two galaxies, a place so empty and so forgotten that even light seemed afraid to travel through it. A place where time felt slow and the stars looked tired, as if they had watched too many wars and wanted nothing to do with another. Floating across that darkness was a single glowing red line, stretching from one side of the void to the other like a wound carved into space itself. Every ship in the galaxy knew that line. Every captain, every trader, every pirate, even the bravest soldiers spoke about it in whispers. It was the border of Terran territory, the one region of the universe no one dared to enter. The stories said that long ago, humans ruled that space. Humans built machines that could bend gravity like clay. Humans created weapons that could erase planets without leaving dust behind. But one day, humanity went silent. Their worlds went dark, their fleets vanished, their colonies stopped sending signals. Some believed humans died. Some believed they hid. Some believed they ascended into something else. But one thing every species agreed on: no one returned from Terran borders. Ships that crossed the line never sent distress calls, never showed on scanners again, never drifted back as wreckage. They simply disappeared. And yet, as centuries passed, the Galactic Empire grew arrogant. Their admirals believed the warnings were just old fear, stories told by weak species to scare children. The Empire claimed humans were gone, forgotten, erased by time. They believed the border was simply abandoned space with a dramatic reputation. But on one cold rotation, when an Imperial scout ship named Vraction drifted too close to the red line, something began to awaken. The Vraction was a small vessel, operated by a crew of 8. They were bored, half asleep, scanning empty stars for pirates or asteroids to report. Nothing ever happened on border patrol. But that day, their sensors flickered. First a tiny blip, then another. Then a pulse of energy so old and so strange that the ship's systems didn't know whether to classify it as radiation, a signal, or a heartbeat. The crew leaned forward, staring at the readings. Before they could discuss it, the lights inside the cockpit dimmed. Every screen turned black except for one. A tiny radar showing a shape inside Terran space. A shape so massive the ship's scanners struggled to measure it. It moved slowly, like a mountain drifting through water, but its movements were precise, controlled, deliberate. The crew felt cold, even though the ship's systems showed normal temperature. Their breath fogged, their skin crawled, and they felt as if something was watching them from the other side of the glass. The captain whispered, "Is something out there?" But no one answered, because everyone already knew the truth. Something was there, and it was awake. Without warning, the comm system crackled. At first it sounded like static, then like wind, then like a voice speaking in a language none of them had heard in centuries. But their translator recognized it instantly. Terran Standard. A dead language. A forbidden dialect. Words that were not meant to be heard anymore. The message was simple: turn back. The crew froze. Some grabbed their chairs. One officer whispered that it had to be a joke, a ghost signal, an echo from an ancient Terran satellite. But then the voice repeated, calmer this time, stern, almost disappointed, turn back. The captain's hands shook. Sweat slid down his neck. He ordered the ship to reverse thrusters. Engines hummed, lights flickered, and the Vraction pulled away from the red border as fast as its engines could burn. The moment the ship crossed back into Imperial space, every screen turned normal again. Heat returned. Breath steadied. The cold vanished. But the fear stayed. The crew filed an immediate emergency report to the Empire, claiming they had encountered a Terran transmission. But instead of believing them, instead of being cautious, instead of respecting the old fear, the Empire mocked them. Inside the Imperial High Command, admirals laughed at the idea of humans being alive. They called the scout crew hysterical, nonsense speakers, weaklings who got scared by a malfunction. They dismissed the report as a sensor glitch. The Emperor himself said, "Humanity is gone. The border is only history." And just like that, they ignored the warning. They ignored the fear. They ignored the ancient rule that had kept the galaxy alive for centuries. But something inside Terran space had heard their laughter. Something old. Something vast. Something patient. And in that moment, stars inside the forbidden region flickered, as if they were blinking awake after a long sleep. While the Empire prepared new fleets, believing they could explore Terran territory without consequence, the red line along the border glowed darker, brighter, stronger. Satellites hidden beneath cosmic dust began to rotate for the first time in ages. Structures embedded inside dead asteroids cracked open. Unseen machinery trembled with power, humming through the void like an awakening beast. In deep Terran space, something the size of a continent shifted. It had slept for generations, waiting for a reason to awaken, waiting for a threat, waiting for a trespass. Now, that trespass had come. And the first thing it did was scan the Empire fleet. The Vraxian crew, still trembling from the warning, watched from their small ship as Imperial battle cruisers lined up at the border, engines blazing, weapons online, ready to enter without fear. They tried to warn the admirals again, but no one listened. The Empire believed they were too powerful to fear ghosts. But the crew could see something the Empire couldn't: shadows moving behind the red line. Not ships. Not organic shapes. Something far more terrifying: massive silhouettes, as if giant machines were rising from black oceans of silence. The crew felt the same cold from earlier creeping back into their bones. One of them whispered, "They are watching us." But the Empire only cared about one thing: claiming Terran space as theirs. As the Empire's lead cruiser prepared to cross the border, the entire region began to vibrate. A low hum echoed through space, not through machines but through the vacuum itself. Every ship felt it. Every pilot felt pressure on their chest, like someone was pushing them back. And then, the red line suddenly pulsed. Once. Twice. Then it stabilized. But when it did, something else happened. Every Imperial ship's engine sputtered. Their scanners turned to static. Their lights dimmed. The entire fleet drifted silently. The Vraxian crew stared in horror. The same cold spread through every vessel. But this time, no voice warned them. No whisper said, "Turn back." Instead, silence. Deep, ancient silence. The Empire fleet rebooted systems in panic, but nothing responded. Their strongest ships felt powerless, like toys held in an invisible hand. And then, just beyond the border, stars began to disappear. Not blink, not dim, disappear, as if something enormous was blocking them. Something so large it swallowed constellations. Something so close it cast a shadow across the whole sector. The Vraxian captain whispered, "This is not a ghost. This is not a story. Something is alive in there." But before he could say more, a second Terran signal rolled through space like thunder. "You were warned." The voice was calm, cold, absolute. The Empire finally felt fear. The Vraxian crew watched as sensors partially returned for a split second, just long enough to detect one impossible reading. A Terran construct so large it didn't fit in their scanners. It was not a ship. It was not a station. It was something in between, a fortress grown into the fabric of space, with an energy signature older than most star systems. It was awake. And the moment it fully activated, the Empire realized something humans had known for centuries. There are lines in the universe you do not cross. But it was already too late. The Empire had crossed the line with pride, with arrogance, with laughter, and now humanity, silent for generations, had opened its eyes again. Something ancient stirred inside Terran territory, and in that awakening heartbeat, the galaxy changed forever as the Empire's fleets trembled at the border without understanding what force had touched their ships. Fear began to crawl through the hearts of soldiers who had never tasted fear before. Men and women trained to conquer planets suddenly feeling as small as dust in a storm. Their voices shaking as they tried to convince themselves that the darkness before them was only empty space. Only myths, only old abandoned tech. But deep inside, each of them felt the truth. A heavy truth pressing on their lungs like a giant hand. A truth that whispered that something ancient was awake and watching them from the shadows that no light could reach. The Vraxian crew tried contacting High Command again. Their voices desperate, pleading, begging the Empire to pull back. But the admirals were too proud, too stubborn, too blind to the danger that hung over them like a silent knife. One of the Vraxian officers, a young communications operator named Lyra, stared at the dark border with tears forming in her eyes, remembering the stories her grandmother once told her as a child. Stories about humans who could fight in absolute silence, about Terran soldiers who walked through fire without slowing down, about ships that vanished and reappeared like phantoms. Those stories used to scare her at night, but now she realized they weren't stories at all but warnings passed down through generations because someone, somewhere, wanted the galaxy to remember the danger sleeping inside that forbidden zone. And yet, here the Empire stood, shaking in their metal armor but still pretending they were brave. When the Empire sent a second message demanding the unknown force reveal itself, the universe responded not with words but with a flicker of light inside Terran space. A soft glow like a heartbeat, slow and steady, old and powerful, as if a giant machine was taking its first breath after centuries of sleep. Every sensor in every ship picked it up. Lyra felt her chest tighten as she whispered, "It's alive." And though no one answered her, everyone felt the same dread slide down their spine. The heartbeat grew louder, not in sound, but in presence. The stars around the glow trembled. The blackness deepened. And then something even stranger happened. Emotions, not words, not visuals, but emotions, flooded through the Empire's fleet. Fear, anger, sadness, loneliness, memories of battles long forgotten, screams from ancient wars, the feeling of 1,000 dying worlds. It was as if Terran space itself was speaking, not with language but with raw emotion, showing the Empire what humanity had endured before they vanished. Soldiers clutched their chests. Pilots gasped. Some collapsed on their knees, crying without understanding why. The admirals barked orders to maintain discipline, but even their voices cracked because they, too, felt the weight of it all. An emotional force so powerful it broke through armor and training and pride. Deep inside Terran territory, something responded to the intrusion. A ripple moved across space, like a hand brushing aside dust, revealing shapes hidden behind the dark. The Empire had believed Terran territory was empty, abandoned, dead. But now massive shadow-like structures slowly emerged from the black void, their metal surfaces scarred from ancient wars, their outlines jagged, broken, yet still alive, still dangerous. They looked like giant war machines fused with the darkness itself, as if they were built not just to travel through space but to become part of it. One structure, bigger than the rest, slowly began to rotate, its surface glowing faintly with symbols that none of the Empire's translators could understand. Yet when Lyra saw those symbols, she felt an emotion that shattered her heart: grief. Deep, painful grief. She didn't know why, but she felt as if the machines themselves were mourning. The crew stared in silence as tears fell from Lyra's eyes, and in that moment, even the strongest officers on the Vraction realized the truth. Humanity had not simply disappeared. Humanity had suffered something so terrible, so painful, that even their machines remembered it. Suddenly, the heartbeat of light inside Terran space pulsed again. Stronger, faster, more urgent. The Vraction's screens flickered, showing glimpses of something impossible. A city floating in darkness, walls made of glowing stone, warships sleeping inside giant caverns of light, soldiers made of metal and bone standing perfectly still as if waiting for a call that never came. And at the center of it all, a single figure sitting in a sphere of dim blue light, a figure that looked human, yet not entirely human, as if time had changed them into something beyond flesh. And though the image lasted only a second, Lyra felt that figure looking back at her, looking through her, into her memories, her fears, her hope, as if checking whether she was an enemy or simply a lost traveler. Then, as quickly as the vision appeared, it disappeared, leaving the crew breathless, shaking, confused, and filled with a strange mix of fear and deep sadness. The Empire's admirals demanded answers, demanded an explanation, demanded the Terran presence show itself clearly. But the only response they received was a soft whisper carried by the dying light: "Do not follow our pain." It was not a threat, not an attack, not a declaration of war. It was a warning filled with sorrow, a plea from something ancient and wounded, something that didn't want to hurt anyone but would do so without hesitation if forced. The Empire ignored that pain. They called it psychological warfare. They called it manipulation. They called it weakness. But Lyra understood something they didn't. Humans were not weak. Humans were dangerous because of their pain. Because their silence wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of power being held back. And while the Empire continued preparing to invade, believing they were unstoppable, believing Terran territory was theirs to claim, believing fear was for lesser beings, the heartbeat inside the Forbidden Zone continued to grow louder. The shadows around the giant structures stirred. And somewhere deep inside that sleeping darkness, for the first time in centuries, a single Terran warship opened its eyes as the first Terran warship opened its eyes deep inside the forbidden darkness. The entire region seemed to inhale, as if space itself was preparing for what was coming, and the Empire's fleets, still frozen in fear and confusion, felt an invisible pressure pushing against their ships, like the calm before a storm that no one could outrun. On the Vraction, Lyra pressed her trembling hands against the screen, watching strange waves of light ripple through the black void, each wave carrying emotions so intense that they made her chest ache. Anger, grief, memories of fire, echoes of screams, shadows of battles where entire worlds were burned alive, and somewhere in the distance, the faint voice of a child crying in a ruined city that did not exist anymore. Everyone felt it. Even the strongest officers, who believed emotion was weakness, felt their eyes blur as if the Terran machines were showing them a truth the Empire had tried to hide for centuries. Lyra whispered, they suffered so much. But no one had the courage to answer, because the pain that moved through the darkness was real, heavy, and old, far older than the Empire's arrogance. Suddenly, the darkness shifted like liquid, and the massive Terran warship began to emerge, not with engines roaring, not with lights flashing, but with slow, smooth motion, as if it had always been part of the dark and was only now choosing to reveal its shape. It was enormous, larger than the Empire's entire frontline formation, a floating titan carved from black metal that shimmered like wet stone under distant starlight. Its hull was covered in scars, thousands of them, each one a memory of war, each one a story of survival. Strange glowing lines, Terran runes, ran across its body like veins carrying ancient energy. The moment the ship fully stepped out of the void, every Imperial soldier's heart dropped as if gravity had increased. No one had ever seen anything like it. Some whispered it looked alive. Some whispered it looked angry. But Lyra whispered the one truth that everyone felt deep in their bones. It's waking up because of us. The warship's core lit up, a soft blue glow that pulsed like a beating heart. With every pulse, the Empire's ships shivered. Sensors flickered. Alarms went silent without reason. Metal creaked as if under pressure from something unseen. Every officer in the fleet felt emotions that did not belong to them. Fear so sharp it burned, sadness so heavy it suffocated, courage so reckless it terrified them, and somewhere deep in that wave of feelings, the lingering echo of desperation, as if humanity had fought to its last breath before disappearing into the dark. Lyra's knees weakened. She clutched her chest as tears slipped down her cheeks without her understanding why, as if the warship had reached into her heart and pressed against the memories she didn't even know she carried. Even the admiral on the flagship, cold, proud, merciless, felt his voice tremble as he tried to issue orders that no one could follow. The Empire had marched into the territory of a wounded giant, and now they were realizing how small they truly were. Then, without warning, the Terran warship released a low, slow hum that vibrated through the void like a mournful song. It was not loud. It was not violent. But it carried an emotion so powerful that every creature in the Empire fleet felt it. Rage mixed with sorrow, grief twisted into strength, a promise forged in the ashes of countless wars. As the hum echoed across space, tiny sparks of light appeared around the ship, like fireflies awakening in darkness. But these were not insects. These were Terran drones, thousands of them, each shaped like a shard of black metal, each glowing faintly with blue energy, each one moving with the precision of a thought. They swarmed around the warship like a storm preparing to break. The Empire had sent 3,000 ships. Terran territory responded with silence and a single heartbeat. But that heartbeat was enough to shatter their courage. Inside the flagship, the Admiral finally felt fear so raw that it stripped him of pride. He watched as the drones formed patterns, circles, lines, symbols, around the massive ship, and though he didn't understand the meaning, he felt dread crawl across his skin. Lyra understood it better than him. "They're not attacking," she said through shaking breaths. "They're remembering something, something painful." And she was right. The drone's formation shifted again, and suddenly the Empire fleet felt a blast of memories. Cities burning, ships exploding, children screaming, soldiers fighting in hopeless battles, human hands reaching out from smoke and dust, fights against enemies the Empire had never known, horrors the galaxy had forgotten, and a final moment. A last stand, where humanity vanished into a storm of fire and silence. The Empire had believed humans were weak. The truth was the opposite. Humanity had fought until there was nothing left to give. And Terran territory was not abandoned. It was morning. The warship's lights dimmed, and for a moment, everything became quiet. The drones froze like statues. The heartbeat faded. The pain settled. But then the warship finally spoke, not through comms, not through signals, but through pure, ancient Terran energy that vibrated against the hulls of every Imperial ship. A single, heavy sentence echoed through their minds. A sentence filled not with hatred, not with anger, but with unbearable sorrow. Why did you come? The question hit every soldier like a spear. Because deep inside, they knew the truth. They didn't come for peace. They came for conquest. The Empire came because they believed they were stronger, because they believed Terran space was empty, because they believed humanity was gone forever. But the warship's presence alone proved they were wrong. As the warship's core pulsed again, casting long shadows across the Empire fleet, a cold realization settled over every mind. Humans had not vanished, they were waiting. Waiting for someone to cross the forbidden line. Waiting for the day the galaxy tested their silence. Waiting for the moment they would need to rise again. And now, because of the Empire's pride, that moment had come. Drifted in fear, frozen in the echo of Terran grief, the Empire finally understood what it means to wake a sleeping giant, and this was only the beginning. The moment the Terran warship's sorrow-filled question faded from the air, a heavy silence fell across the entire region. A silence so deep that even the engines of the Empire fleet dared not make a sound, as if the machines themselves understood the weight of what stood before them. For the first time in their history, the Empire realized. They were facing an opponent who didn't roar, didn't threaten, didn't brag. An opponent who grieved, and somehow that grief was more terrifying than any weapon they had ever seen. Admiral Kayla, a man known throughout the galaxy for his iron will and cold heart, found himself unable to speak, unable to breathe normally, because as he stared at the Terran warship floating like a wounded god in the darkness, he felt something his armor couldn't protect him from: shame. Deep, burning shame. He realized the Empire had not only crossed a line but had stepped into the memory of a civilization that had already lost everything once, and the thought that they were reopening old wounds made even the toughest soldiers feel small. On the Vraction, Lyra pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the cockpit as tears streamed down her face again, because she could feel the Terran pain as if it was her own, and in that moment she whispered a truth no one else had the courage to say out loud. They don't want to fight us. They want to stop us from becoming the monsters they once faced. Her voice cracked, and even the hardened Vraction captain looked away, unable to handle the raw emotion that filled the room. Suddenly, the darkness around the Terran warship rippled again, and more structures emerged. Massive walls floating like broken halos, fragments of colossal armor from battles lost long ago, pillars of metal inscribed with glowing runes of a language older than any Imperial archive. Some pieces looked shattered, others looked burned, and every surface carried the weight of sacrifice. These were not weapons. These were remains, graves, memorials, scars. Lyra realized with a gasp that the Empire was not just trespassing into Terran territory. They were trespassing into a battlefield where humanity had died protecting something greater than themselves. As the fragments drifted into view, the Terran drones formed a slow spiral around them, and suddenly the Empire fleet felt a wave of emotion so powerful it shattered their composure. Screams of dying soldiers, the heavy breath of pilots staying awake through impossible battles, mothers crying as they sent their children away in evacuation pods, flames swallowing cities, oceans turning into steam under bombardment, and somewhere deep in that whirlwind of grief, a single Terran soldier standing, alone on a collapsing bridge, whispering a promise to the stars: "We will protect our home, no matter the cost." The Empire had always believed humans were primitive, but now they saw the truth. Humans were not primitive. They were resilient, relentless, unstoppable when pushed to the edge. They were the kind of species that rose from ashes stronger than before. And this warship, this silent giant, was not a weapon. It was a monument carrying the souls of those lost in a final war the galaxy had never been told about. Admiral Kalis, second-in-command, suddenly broke into sobs, holding his face with both hands as he fell to his knees, because the Terran memories stabbed straight through his chest like hot steel. The Admiral wanted to command him to stand, to behave, to be a soldier. But he couldn't, because he himself felt like an intruder in a graveyard where every shadow whispered the cost of peace. And then, without warning, the Terran warship shifted its gaze, or whatever counted as its gaze, toward the Empire's flagship. The great scarred armor of the ancient vessel glowed with a faint blue pattern, like veins lighting up beneath stone skin. The drones tightened their spiral. Every Imperial heart froze. The warship spoke again, not with anger, not with fire, but with a voice heavy with sorrow that made even the hardest Imperial soldier tremble. "You repeat the mistakes of those who came before you," it said. "You step forward with pride, not understanding the damage you bring." The voice felt like a cold hand pressing against their hearts, not crushing them but holding them still, forcing them to listen. "We warned the galaxy once," the warship continued. "We begged them not to cross our line. They ignored us. And because of their pride, we lost everything." Lyra's lips parted as she whispered, "Please, don't do this again." But the Admiral, desperate to regain control, attempted to speak. His voice cracked. We didn't know," he said, though the words tasted like lies. The Terran warship paused, its lights dimming as if thinking. Then came a moment so emotional that several Imperial soldiers broke down crying without understanding why. The warship whispered, "Ignorance does not free you from responsibility." In that moment, something unexpected happened. The warship's glow softened. The spiral of drones slowed. And a wave of pure emotion washed across the Empire fleet. Kindness. Terran kindness. A kindness so deep and so heavy it hurt. Because it was kindness from a species who had paid the ultimate price for giving too much to the galaxy once before. The Empire realized humans were not warning them because they hated them. They were warning them because they didn't want the galaxy to suffer the same fate they suffered. Because they still protected life even in their silence. Because even after being betrayed, even after losing everything, humanity still cared. This realization hit the Empire harder than any weapon could have. It broke through their pride. It crushed their arrogance. It left them trembling and speechless. Then, as the emotions faded, the warship released a faint ripple through the void. Not a threat, not an attack, but a signal that felt like a sigh. All around it, the ancient Terran structures slowly began to dim again, their runes fading like dying embers. The warship's core returned to a soft heartbeat pulse. And the Terran voice delivered its final message of warning, gentle yet unbreakable: "Leave this place. Do not force us to remember the war we never wished to fight again." The Empire fleet, weakened and overwhelmed, finally understood that stepping any closer would not start a battle. It would open an old wound, one powerful enough to drown the galaxy in fire. On the Vraction, Lyra closed her eyes, her voice trembling as she whispered, "We woke something that never wanted to wake." And far across the void, the Terran warship, ancient and grieving, watched them with the patience of a guardian who had already buried too many worlds. The Empire should have turned back when the Terran warship gave its final warning. But pride is a sickness that blinds even the strongest, and Admiral Kayla, shaking yet desperate to salvage his reputation, ordered a single dreadnought to step forward. A foolish attempt to prove control in a place where control did not exist, and the moment that massive warship crossed the red line by even a single meter, the universe changed again. The darkness around the Terran vessel seemed to twist like a living ocean reacting to an intruder, and the warship's soft heartbeat suddenly stopped, replaced by a silence so heavy that the entire Imperial fleet held its breath. The Terran drones, once floating gently like fireflies in morning, snapped into perfect formation with terrifying speed, their glowing blue edges sharpening like blades, forming a circle around the intruding dreadnought. The dreadnought fired warning shots, beams of golden plasma meant only to intimidate, but the plasma dissolved into nothing before even reaching halfway, as if the darkness itself swallowed the attack. On the Vraction, Lyra covered her mouth, tears falling again not from fear but from the pain radiating from the darkness. the pain of a wound reopening. "They didn't want this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They begged us not to do this." But no one in the Empire could undo what had already been triggered. The Terran warship slowly shifted its massive, wounded body, its ancient armor groaning like mountains being pushed by unseen hands. Its core lit up again, brighter than before, but this time the light was not calm or gentle. It flickered with rage, sorrow, memories of fire, and the echoes of a promise humanity swore long ago, a promise carved into the bones of their dead. "Never again will we let anyone destroy our home." The dreadnought's captain shouted in fear as every system on his ship went dark. Engines dead, weapons frozen, shields collapsed. The Terran drones moved, silent as falling snow, surrounding the dreadnought like a ring of angels made of steel and grief. They didn't fire. They didn't attack. They simply hovered, waiting, holding judgment in their quiet presence. The Empire had always believed Terran technology was brute force, overwhelming weapons and unstoppable engines. But now they saw the truth. Terran power was precision, emotion, intelligence, and a terrifying level of control forged in trauma. The dreadnought's hull began to vibrate under a force too delicate to break it yet too strong to resist. "What are they doing?" one Imperial officer whispered, his voice trembling. But Lyra understood before anyone else. "They are showing restraint," she said. "They are holding back." The idea shook her to the core. If this was restraint, then the full power would be something the universe was never meant to see. The warship's sorrowful voice returned, echoing through the minds of every living soul in the fleet. "Why do you force us to open the wounds we buried?" it asked, and the words dragged countless emotions with them. Rage twisted by grief, strength born from suffering, the memory of a final battle where humans stood alone against a storm of enemies larger than empires. In the Admiral's mind, images flashed without permission. Terran soldiers fighting in burning cities, mothers shielding children from falling debris, whole worlds set ablaze by enemies who had underestimated Earth's resolve, and a final, devastating sacrifice that ripped humanity out of the galaxy's eyes and into the silent darkness they now protected with their last breath. The Admiral fell to his knees as the truth crushed the walls of his pride. The Empire had not stumbled into empty land. They had stepped into a graveyard where humanity buried billions of its own people. And the dreadnought drifting helplessly before the Terran warship had violated sacred ground. The Terran drones tightened their formation, and suddenly the entire dreadnought shook violently, not from damage, but from emotion. The ship groaned like a living beast under pressure as Terran energy slipped through its hull like a whisper, touching memories inside every crew member. They felt the weight of Terran sacrifice as if it were their own. They felt the fire of Terran last stands. They felt the cold of Terran silence when humanity fell into darkness. Some soldiers screamed. Some fainted. Some cried like children. Admiral Kayla watched helplessly as the dreadnought, his pride, his symbol of power, was brought to its knees by nothing but human sorrow. No fire. No weapons. Just emotion so strong it broke warriors more efficiently than destruction. Then the Terran warship did something no one expected. Instead of destroying the dreadnought, it touched its hull with a single beam of soft blue light, gentle, warm, almost comforting. The dreadnought immediately stopped shaking. The cries faded. The pain dissolved. The entire ship stabilized, as if the Terran vessel was healing a wound instead of punishing it. Lyra gasped at the sight, her heart twisting. "They still have mercy," she whispered. "Even after everything, they still choose mercy." The beam retracted slowly, almost sadly, and then the Terran voice delivered a message so emotional it left even the toughest soldiers trembling. "We remember the pain of war. Do not make us remember again." The dreadnought was released, drifting backwards as if a hand had gently pushed it away. Engines reignited. Lights flickered back. The ship regained breath. But its crew would never be the same. They had touched something ancient and sacred. They had felt humanity's grief. And they had survived only because the Terran warship allowed them to. The Empire, shaken to its core, finally understood that they were not dealing with an enemy. They were dealing with a survivor of a war that had nearly ended the stars themselves. And as the Terran drones slowly faded back into the darkness, Lyra whispered the one truth that every soul in the fleet now feared. If this is mercy, What will their anger look like? And somewhere deep in Terran space, another heartbeat answered. The Empire should have retreated after witnessing the Terran warship's mercy, but fear mixed with pride creates a poison that clouds judgment, and Admiral Kayla, horrified at his own failure yet too broken to accept defeat, sent a secret command through a private channel, ordering a hidden strike fleet stationed behind a dead moon to launch an attack, hoping he could destroy the Terran vessel before anyone understood the truth. But the moment those warships powered their weapons, Terran territory reacted like a wounded animal suddenly stabbed again, and the space around the ancient warship trembled with a deep, terrifying sound. Not a roar, not a hum, but something living, something ancient, something that felt like the heartbeat of a titan slowly rising to its feet. Lyra felt the sound in her bones, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would break, and her eyes widened in terror because she knew, before anyone else did, that this was the moment humanity stopped holding back. The hidden strike fleet fired everything they had at once, missiles streaking through the void, plasma beams slicing across the dark, railgun shells spinning like falling stars. But the attacks never reached the Terran warship. Instead, the space in front of it bent like liquid, and the weapons curved harmlessly away, melting into blue sparks as if they had been erased from existence. The warship didn't flinch. It didn't move. It simply awakened. The blue glow at its core shifted to a violent white, brighter than anything the Empire had ever seen, and the ancient runes carved into its armor ignited like burning rivers, flowing across its massive body in patterns that pulsed with raw emotion. Pain, rage, sorrow, and something deeper, something older, something that felt like the memory of humanity itself refusing to die. The Terran drones returned, but this time they didn't move gently or quietly. They burst from the darkness like a storm of blue fire, each one leaving a trail of light as they accelerated faster than the Empire's sensors could track. 1,000 drones shot toward the hidden strike fleet in perfect silence, not attacking, not detonating, but simply passing through the enemy ships like ghosts. And when they emerged on the other side, every Imperial warship they touched went completely still. Lights off, engines dead, weapons frozen. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Just stopped. As if the Terran drones had reached inside their cores and turned off their will to fight. Inside those ships, soldiers screamed as emotional shock waves hit them. Visions of Terran mothers running through burning streets, Terran children hiding under collapsing buildings, Terran soldiers fighting against an enemy the galaxy had forgotten, and finally, the unbearable image of Earth's final day before disappearing from the stars. Some Imperial soldiers fell unconscious. Some dropped their weapons and curled into the corners, sobbing. Some could only stare blankly as they felt a grief not their own bury them alive. Admiral Kayla watched in horror as his strike fleet, his last gamble, fell silent like dying stars. His pride shattered. His voice broke. For the first time in his life, he felt true helplessness. The mighty Empire, feared across galaxies, was nothing before this silent Terran judgment. But Terran mercy did not come this time. The warship began to move, slow at first, then with purpose, its massive form gliding forward like a god waking after centuries of forced sleep. With each motion it made, the stars trembled and the darkness rippled outward, as if the void itself was afraid to touch the ancient vessel. Lyra felt tears streaming down her face, not from fear but from the emotional storm pouring out of the warship. A storm filled with heartbreak so heavy that even breathing felt painful. She whispered a shaking sentence that silenced everyone on the Vraction. They didn't want to fight, but now they have no choice. Then, in a moment that would be carved into the Empire's history forever, the Terran warship released its full presence. Not an attack, not a burst of energy, but a wave of raw human memory. Every Imperial ship, every soldier, every admiral felt it hit them like a tidal wave, drowning them in visions of the last Terran stand. They saw a sky burning red. They saw mountains cracking. They saw oceans turning into storms. They saw millions of humans standing together on a dying world, refusing to surrender even when the universe abandoned them. They saw the creation of the Terran warship, a ship built not as a weapon but as a coffin, a guardian, a living archive carrying the last breath of a civilization that chose silence because the galaxy had turned against them. And they saw the truth behind Terran territory. This was not just a border. This was a grave. A promise. A vow. A sanctuary for the ghosts of humanity. The memories faded, leaving every Imperial heart hollow, broken, trembling. And then, the Terran warship spoke, its voice no longer soft or sorrowful, but powerful, commanding, like a force that had carried an entire species on its back. If you cross the line again, we will not stop at mercy. The sentence hit like thunder. The drones circled the warship tighter. The glow turned fierce. The Empire fleet recoiled as if the void itself pushed them back. Admiral Kayla dropped to his knees and whispered a single, frightened truth. We woke the wrong gods. The Terran warship turned away from the Empire, not running, not hiding, but reminding them that it didn't need to face them to destroy them. Its core dimmed to a calm glow again, but the air around it remained charged with a power the galaxy had never witnessed. And as the great vessel slowly drifted back into the depths of Terran space, Lyra whispered the final thought shared by every terrified soul in the Empire. If this was only one ship, what else is sleeping in there? The Empire's fleets drifted in terrified silence after the Terran warship disappeared into the darkness, but the air around them still felt heavy as if the ghost of its presence refused to leave, and every soldier, every officer, every captain felt an invisible weight pressing on their chest, reminding them that the galaxy they thought they ruled had always belonged to a species they had forgotten. The species they woke without understanding the price. Admiral Kayla, pale and shaking, stared at the dead screens before him, his mind replaying the Terran memories over and over like a broken record. Children crying in burning cities, soldiers dragging wounded civilians through collapsing streets, parents holding their kids for the last time as fire swallowed their world. The pain was so real, so suffocating, that it made him feel like he had lived those final moments himself. He clutched the edge of his command chair, breath trembling, as guilt crashed through him like cold water. We should have never come here, he whispered, but the words felt too small, too late, too powerless against the truth echoing inside him. And while the Empire struggled to breathe under the weight of Terran sorrow, far inside the forbidden darkness, the ancient warship spoke to someone the Empire could not see. Deep within Terran territory, a second warship, larger, older, angrier, began to stir, its broken armor rattling like bones waking from centuries of sleep, and its core flickering with a darker shade of blue, almost white-hot, carrying a different emotion than the one they felt earlier. Rage, pure and ancient, rage born from betrayal that had never healed. The first warship, the Guardian, sent a quiet pulse to stop it, a soft emotional message filled with sorrow and restraint. But the awakening ship did not listen. Its pain was too deep, its anger too old, its memories too violent. It remembered the enemy that broke Earth. It remembered the screams. It remembered the firestorm that swallowed cities and skies. It remembered what humanity promised before disappearing. If the galaxy returns to the path of conquest, we will not allow it to happen again. Now, sensing the Empire's trespass, the sleeping giant began to awaken, shaking the entire region with its heartbeat. A heartbeat that felt less like grief and more like the drum of war that once shattered star systems. On the Vraxian, Lyra felt the shift first. She gasped, grabbing the console as her vision blurred, her mind drowning under a wave of emotion so violent that it nearly broke her. Something else is waking, she whispered, her voice choking. The crew stared at her in confusion until the dark space ahead of them rippled like a giant black cloth being pulled aside by unseen hands. A faint light flickered deep inside, but this light was different, sharp, chaotic, trembling with anger. And then, without warning, a voice, not sorrowful like before, but furious, wounded, shaking with unimaginable rage, echoed through every Imperial mind. Why do you still stand here? The shock was so intense that several officers fell to the floor screaming, clutching their heads as the emotion tore through them like lightning. Even Admiral Kayla pressed his hands against his temples, tears streaming from his eyes as an image forced itself into his mind. Terran soldiers lying dead on a battlefield of broken metal. A young Terran child crying beside the body of their mother. Fires consuming everything, and at the center of the destruction, an enemy far more monstrous than any the Empire had ever known. The rage behind that memory was not directed at the Empire alone. It was directed at the return of conquest itself. The Empire fleet panicked. Ships drifted dangerously. Pilots shouted commands no one followed. The entire formation fell apart like a frightened flock running from a storm. "We have to retreat," one captain screamed through comms, but before Admiral Kayla could give the order, space itself cracked again, and the second Terran warship began to emerge. It was larger than the first, its hull marked with scars so deep they looked like open wounds frozen in metal. Its armor was jagged, broken in places, patched in others, glowing with old battle energy that never faded. Unlike the first warship, this one carried no gentleness, no restraint, no mercy in its presence. It felt like pure war, like a weapon forged from despair and sharpened by sacrifice. When its core ignited, the entire Empire fleet felt heat against their skin even though space was cold, felt their hearts pound as if caught in a blast wave, felt their souls tremble as if a giant stood before them and decided whether to let them live. Lyra collapsed to her knees as the warship's rage poured through her tears falling uncontrollably, her breath trembling violently. This one remembers the end," she whispered, voice shaking. "This one remembers the final battle." The Terran warship then spoke again, but its voice was not a whisper. It was a roar inside every mind, a roar made of heartbreak and fury. "We buried our dead in these stars. You dare bring war here again?" The words hit the Empire like a tidal wave. 1,000 officers dropped to their knees. The dreadnought crews fainted. The strongest soldiers cried like children. Even Kayla, the once feared admiral, bowed his head, beaten not by weapons but by emotion so powerful it crushed his arrogance like ash in a storm. Suddenly, the first Terran warship, the Guardian, moved between the Empire and the raging giant, its soft blue glow flaring bright in a desperate attempt to hold the other ship back. It sent emotion, not commands. Peace, restraint, mercy, memory of promises, memory of humanity's final vow to never destroy again. For a moment, the raging warship paused, its core flickering uncertainly, torn between vengeance and the promise it made long ago. The Empire watched in terrified silence as two Terran titans, one calm, one furious, stood facing each other like brothers divided by pain. Lyra pressed her trembling hand against her chest as a sob escaped her lips. "Even now, they fight themselves before they fight us," she whispered, because even in their rage, the Terrans were trying to protect the galaxy from suffering what humanity once suffered. Then, with a violent tremor that shook the stars, the angry warship slowly dimmed, its fury quieting under the weight of Terran memory. It turned away from the Empire, but its final message echoed through every ship like a warning carved in fire: "Leave, while we still remember how to show mercy." And as both Terran titans slowly drifted back into the darkness, their lights fading like dying stars, the Empire felt something they had never felt before, an understanding that humanity had not disappeared out of weakness, but because the galaxy was too fragile to survive the full force of what humans truly would. As both Terran titans faded back into the darkness, their ancient bodies disappearing behind the curtain of shadows like ghosts returning to the graves that birthed them, the Empire's fleets drifted in a state of pure, choking fear, their hearts pounding as if the universe itself had just placed a hand over their mouths to silence them forever. Every soldier, every officer, every admiral stared into the direction the warships vanished, unable to speak, unable to breathe properly, because the silence left behind was not calm. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a storm waiting to break. Admiral Kayla wiped the tears from his shaking face, ashamed of every decision he had made, feeling the guilt of 1,000 deaths that weren't his but now lived in his memory like scars he could never erase, memories given to him by Terran machines that held emotions as sharp as blades. The Vraction trembled slightly as its engines restarted, systems flickering back to life as if waking from a nightmare, but Lyra did not move from where she knelt on the cold floor, her hands still pressed against her chest as she stared into the void with eyes that no longer saw the universe the same way. She felt changed, cracked open by Terran emotion, touched by the echoes of a species that had suffered beyond imagination yet still chose restraint over destruction. "They didn't kill us," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "They let us live, again." But the fear beneath her words was unmistakable, because she also understood something the others did not. Terran mercy was not infinite, and the galaxy was standing on the edge of a blade sharpened by centuries of pain. Then, suddenly, the stars ahead flickered violently, like lanterns shaken by a hidden hand, and the air around the Imperial fleet seemed to thicken again, not with rage this time, but with warning, a cold warning that crawled through the metal of their ships and seeped into the bones of every living being on board. A soft hum rose from the darkness, not the angry vibration of the second Terran warship, not the sorrowful sigh of the first, but something calmer, deeper, older, as if the very fabric of Terran territory wanted to speak for itself. The red border line that marked the forbidden zone pulsed slowly, each pulse sending faint ripples across space like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant deciding whether to open its eyes again. And then it happened. A single beam of light stretched from deep within Terran space, thin as a thread, bright as a waking star, stopping just before the Empire's fleet, not threatening them, not attacking them, but holding them in place like a quiet hand demanding their silence. The beam expanded slowly, and within it, the faint outline of a human figure shimmered, tall, calm, standing in the center of an impossible light, its face hidden, its features blurred by energy older than the Empire itself. No one could move. No one could speak. The figure lifted its head slightly, and though there was no voice, no sound, every mind in the Empire felt a single overwhelming emotion: disappointment. The light deepened, forming waves of blue and white, and the figure raised an arm, pointing directly at the Imperial fleet with a gesture so slow and calm that it felt like judgment delivered by the universe itself. A voice finally came, not from the figure, not from the warships, but from the very space around them. A voice woven from countless Terran memories, layered with grief and steel, echoing across the minds of all who trespassed. "This is your final warning," the voice said, heavy and unbreakable. "You were shown mercy twice. There will not be a third." The beam tightened slightly, making the stars tremble, and the Empire felt an emotion so strong it nearly brought them to their knees. Human determination. Human wrath. Human promise. The same promise that had once kept Earth standing against impossible odds. "Do not cross this line again." The voice continued, now colder, sharper. "If you enter our territory one more time, we will not hold back what sleeps beneath our ruins." Admiral Kayla let out a trembling breath as the meaning of the message cracked through him like lightning. There were more Terran warships, more Titans, more machines buried under the ashes of a forgotten apocalypse, and the two ancient vessels they witnessed were only the beginning, only the surface of a nightmare the galaxy was never meant to awaken. Lyra finally rose to her feet, tears still drying on her cheeks, but this time her voice carried a strange, almost spiritual sadness as she whispered, "They don't want to destroy us, but if we force them, they will end everything." The figure in the beam slowly lowered its hand, and the light began to fade back into the deep darkness of Terran space, shrinking like a dying star until only a faint spark remained. The red border line glowed one final time, brighter than ever before, a blood-colored warning burned into the night sky. And then, silence. Pure, absolute silence. The Empire's fleet slowly pulled back, engines quiet, hearts numb, minds forever changed by what they had seen. No one dared look back. No one dared speak. Every soldier understood, without needing to be told, that they had come face to face with the truth of humanity. Its pain, its strength, its unbearable rage, its endless sacrifice, and that the galaxy was still alive only because the Terrans allowed it to be. As the Empire retreated, disappearing into the distant stars like frightened shadows running from dawn, the darkness behind the red line pulsed one final time, as if something inside Terran territory opened an eye and watched them leave. And the unspoken question hanging in the void chilled every soul who felt it. What will happen on the day the Empire forgets this warning? And what will awaken when humanity is forced to rise again?